Good evening, my dear students, and welcome once more to a new session in this academic workshop related to technical English. Today, the topic we're going to deal with is really important. Actually, it is a very important resource, especially when dealing with writing from an academic perspective. The topic is going to be passive voice. And, the topic is really important, taking into account that sometimes dealing with this resource can constitute a real trouble for some English students, taking into account that they don't know how to use it and some principles that guide the correct use, the acquisition, and the usage of this resource when teaching the language or when dealing with academic texts or something like that. Okay, so we're going to enter the topic tonight, which is passive voice. Okay, passive voice is a resource that has to do with a previous comprehension and understanding of the active voice. So prior to the identification of what a passive voice is, we need to go to what an active voice is. So taking into account the nature that the voice of the sentence has in English, and not only in English, but in every language, we can identify two different voices and two, as a result of that, different kinds of sentences, which are active sentences and passive sentences. So let's identify both of them. Okay, the active sentences in English show and present a subject which constitutes the person or the item, etc., because sometimes it is not exactly a human person, but it's a thing or an animal, etc., an object, an idea, etc. And in all of that regard, we are going to talk in terms of a person. Those are grammatical persons. And when analyzing and having active sentences, we can see immediately that the subject of such a sentence is the one in terms of doing the action. So that is the one that does the action in English. So, Mary helped the boy. Look at this. We find here that Mary, which is the subject of this sentence, is the one in charge of doing the action. This is the subject. Okay? Mary is the one that does. She is the agent. She is the one that does and carries out the action mentioned by the verb. But we can also identify a verb. This is the verb. And later on, we find structure and a section in the sentence, which is the one that receives the action. That boy that constitutes the object here is the one that gets benefited or harmed, in this case, starting from the action mentioned by the verb. So he, in this case, the boy, receives directly the action. So the action falls on him, and this is the object. Okay, so once more, we can identify three essential elements that an active sentence has: the subject, the verb, and the object. Now, we say, by the way, that the subject here is an active subject because of the fact that he carries out the action. And as a result, the sentence is called active sentence. So those are active sentences. I'm going to give you another example for you to see extended what we have explained. For example, they made Ferrari cars in Italy. Okay, here, for example, in this sentence number 2, we find that here the subject is not very determined. it's not very specific. But anyway, we can have a subject over there. And this is they. So those they, now it is not well defined. It is any person, or any people in that country, by the way. This is the subject. And now, once more, we see a verb in that sentence, which is make. And finally, we find that information which constitutes an answer for the question, what? The one that receives in a direct form the action mentioned by the verb, Ferrari cars. So this is the object, and we find some additional information related to where the action is done. Okay? So in this case, in Italy. But this doesn't constitute one essential component that the active sentences have. Okay? It can be, or it may be, or it may not. So this is not going to be a remarkable problem. Now, what is, with respect to a passive sentence, the difference between this and this? Now let's go to what a passive sentence is. What passive sentences are. Okay, now we are going to focus our attention on the object, or what constituted the object of the first sentences. Mary helped the boy and they made Ferrari cars in Italy. So now we will take the boy, and that will constitute the subject of the second sentence. The boy. Look at this. This action is in simple past, and we are going to use a simple past here too, but not with the verb or starting from the verb that was used in the first sentence. We need the inclusion of another verb that has to be in past tense, but that is not help. It is going to be, the verb to be. Well, we say the boy was, and now this verb is going to be taken into account too. The presence of this verb is here too, but not in terms of the tense that was used here, but we are going to use the past participle of such a verb, which in this case is the same because it is a regular verb. So, help, and the past participle is helped in the same way that the past tense is constructed. And this helped will come here. And now, the information on the subject, the information on who was the person who did the action in sentence number 1 comes here too, and it's introduced by the preposition by Mary. The boy was helped by Mary. It means that Mary, which was the subject in sentence number 1, is going to be the agent complement in sentence number 2. The boy was helped by Mary. And this is a passive sentence. So what is going to determine the difference between an active sentence and a passive sentence? The fact and the existence of a subject which is not doing the action over there. This is a subject that doesn't do or doesn't carry out the action over there, but this is a subject which receives the action mentioned by the verb. So in this case, we can say that that sentence is passive because the subject is passive. It doesn't do any action, or he, in this case it is a boy, or the subject, it doesn't do any action, but it receives the action on the other hand. So the subject now is passive. That is why the sentences are called in such a way, passive sentences. Let's carry out the transformation from sentence number 2, and we will find a very important detail. The detail here is that Mary, for example, in sentence number 1, is a person who is well defined. For me to be able to say Mary in a sentence requires that the person who are listening to me know and well know for sure who Mary is. That is why I refer to that person. But they, in this case, is going to constitute and is going to present a difference, taking into account that they is not a well-defined subject. Well, in this case, they is not going to be important. Actually, sometimes we will see that in sentences, in English, in German, in Spanish, etc., in any language, the fact of mentioning who is the one in charge of doing the action is not important because we don't have to know about it, because it is not relevant or because I don't want people to know about it. So, and that is why in this case, they is not going to constitute a well-defined subject, a well-defined person in charge of doing the action. So let's do it. We say Ferrari cars, and in this case I'm taking the object into account, Ferrari cars, and here the verb is in present, simple present, so I'm going to use simple present here too, of the verb that I had mentioned before, which is to be, Ferrari cars, and this verb is going to be one more time present here too in sentence number 2, but with the structure of a past participle. So remember that the past participle of make is made. Here, for example, we have the case of a verb whose past, the simple past and the past participle constitute exactly the same structure. But not all the time we'll see that. You know that for sure. Ferrari cars are made in Italy. And now look at this. The fact of having a non-well-defined subject implies that in sentence number 2, which is the passive sentence, it's not important to include it. So it is not usual to say Ferrari cars are made by them in Italy. So actually it is bad. We are not going to include the subject for it to constitute the agent complement in sentence number 2 when such subject is they or someone, etc. So whenever we have that, this is going to constitute something that is not important or relevant, and it doesn't have to be mentioned in the passive sentence. So one more time, Ferrari cars constitute the subject, to be past participle, and then additional information that was mentioned before. The fact of mentioning and referring to the place or maybe time, etc. Okay? It depends on what kind of information you include in the original sentence. Okay, now we'll continue with the identification and the way to transform and order the transformation from passive sentences into active sentences, taking each verb tense into account. So let's do it in a moment, okay? Let's do it now. Okay, now look at this. Let's take 3 elements into account: subject, verb, and the information which constitutes an answer for the question, what? So, Tom opened and the door, right? And let's go and let's review every tense from the ones you have already taken and studied. Tom opens the door. Now, Tom is opening the door. Tom has opened the door. And here we can identify three tenses corresponding to the big segment that is the present. Present simple or simple present, present continuous, and present perfect. One remark or one observation that has to be taken into account is that here, for example, present perfect continuous and all the continuous tenses related to perfect. I mean, present perfect continuous, past perfect continuous, and future perfect continuous are not going to be taken into account, right? So this is the simple present, present continuous, and present perfect. Now let's continue with the corresponding past tenses. Tom opened the door. Now, Tom was opening the door. And Tom had opened the door. Now let's continue with the future tenses. Tom will open the door. Tom will be opening the door. And I'm going to write over here the last one, the one that corresponds to the future perfect. Tom will have opened the door. And now we have every verb tense here. The only one that we haven't included, according to what I told you, are the perfect continuous tenses. Present perfect continuous, past perfect continuous, and future perfect continuous. So let's carry out the corresponding transformations. These are active sentences. And over here we will have the passive sentences. Okay, right. Well, as usual, and as you have already understood, we are going to take the object for it to constitute the subject in the next sentence. I'm going to repeat the conception. This object is going to constitute the subject in the next sentence, as you had seen before. So we say, the door, and now, focus your attention on the verb tenses because they are really important tenses. So, opens is in present tense, and now present tense will be included here. The door is opened by Tom. The door is opened by Tom. This is the passive sentence. And this is going to include, one more time, the object, that now it is the subject, the verb to be, and this verb, which is the one that refers to the action itself, is present, but in the structure of a past participle verb, a past participle form. So the door is opened, and now this is additional information in terms of who in charge of the action is. So, and this has to be introduced by the preposition by, okay, by Tom. Now let's continue with the next one. This is present continuous. So the sentence over there has to be in present continuous too, and the tense is one more time, present continuous, but of course the verb now is going to be, okay? So we say, the door is being opened by Tom. The door is being opened by Tom. Okay? Look at the fact that the two central and essential components are the ones that are in red. The things here is in the verb itself, and the things here is in the verb to be. The door is being opened by Tom. Two words in this section, and two words constitute the central part in this section too. Now, Tom has opened the door, and this is this way. The door has been opened by Tom. The door has been. Look at the fact that we need to keep identically the tense which is presented both here and here. Here with the verb itself, and over there with the verb to be. Whatever the action is. I need to clarify that whatever the verb is here, the agreement in terms of tense is going to be starting from to be. No matter if the action here is open, drive, eat, etc., the agreement is always constituted and arranged in terms of to be. Now past. Tom opened the door. So we say, the door was opened by Tom. Now past continuous. The door was being opened by Tom. And now here, for the past perfect, the door had been opened by Tom. And now we have the corresponding past tenses here. The door was. Tom opened and the door was. Tom was opening and the door was being opened. So according to what I said, the agreement has to be perfect. So past continuous here and past continuous over here too. Tom had opened and the door had been. Look at the common factor we can notice and realize on so far. So it is the presence of to be, is, being, been, was, being, and been. Right? Okay. Now let's go with the future, or to the corresponding future structures. Tom will open the door and we will say, the door will be opened by Tom. The door will be opened by Tom. The next one, future continuous. The door will be being opened by Tom. And finally, this is the future perfect. We will say, the door will have been opened by, let me do it completely by placing it here. The door will have been opened by Tom. Now we can have all the agreement and all the transformations taken into account, the corresponding tenses in active sentences and passive sentences too. There are some other structures that will need to be analyzed too. We'll need to analyze because even though they don't constitute verb tenses, they are important structures that we use in everyday English. And I'm talking about the future with going to, the future seen from the past, the conditional simple, and the conditional perfect. So we'll see that in a moment. I'm going to take this off. Here we can see the corresponding structures. I'm going to take this off. And let's go to them. Okay, now we'll see these structures I was referring to. First, future with going to. Tom is going to open the door. This is future with going to, be plus going to. Now the future seen from the past. Tom was going to open the door. Conditional simple. Tom would open the door. And the conditional perfect. Tom would have opened the door. Okay, let's carry out the corresponding transformations. Here it is the door is going to be opened by Tom. Now here we can see that the future with be plus going to is going to place one more time the conjugation of the essence. I mean the essential verb taken into account in passive sentences, which is to be. So the door is going to be opened by Tom. One more time, the central verb, the one that refers to the action itself, is going to be present, but in the structure corresponding to a past participle form. Let's continue with the other ones. This is the future seen from the past. So the door was going to be opened by Tom. Okay, and these two last ones, well, they don't constitute exactly a tense. Actually, would is going to correspond to what a modal verb is, but places the action in a future time submitted to a condition. It's a future that is to come, but submitted to a condition. So it is also an important structure, and we will take it into account here. So Tom would open the door is transformed this way. The door would be opened by Tom. And finally, the conditional perfect. The door would have been opened by Tom. Okay, and now we can have the structures, I mean taking every tense into account, and these very important structures to analyze and to take into consideration in English. So these are the ones, and these are the ways. I mean, transformations are carried out from one structure into another one. Okay, thank you so much for your attention, and we will continue with the second part of the instruction tonight in a moment. Thank you very much.